what I'm going to do really is just to look at, in summary, two presentations and then prepare the ground, so to say, for us to discuss. So actually I'm a lead reviewer, not a lead discussant. Okay, distinguished members of the high table and very important members of the audience. Let me start first of all with the presentation from Mr. Mike Omeri, the DG of NOAA. In the presentation done by his representative, Mr. Isaac Onukobe, the following issues in the paper titled Reorienting Nigerian Youth for National Development were raised. First, that there is a collapse of cherished values which have been guiding principles, especially in African societies and most importantly in Nigeria, and the collapse of infrastructure leading to emergence of a troubled economy and the attendant rise of corruption. Now, this has led to the desire for moral rectitude, and that has been addressed by raising various agencies, including NOAA, which is the recent manifestation of that need. And the agency has responded in kind with a number of youth programs to inculcate national values. Recently, the agency itself has included new facets in keeping with the transformation agenda of the current administration. Recognizing that youth are pivotal for change, growth, and development, there's a need to be appropriately guided, and youths have been involved in the political and socio-economic history of Nigeria. So youths have always had an important role to play in various facets of our development. And there is therefore the need for today's youths to toe the path of honor and respect. And it is time to do the right thing to transform Nigeria by transforming the youth. So in a nutshell, that was a presentation from NOAA. Now, this leads us to the presentation by Dr. Sam Amadi, who at some point in time, some years ago, was a lawyer in a case I was involved in, which has become a landmark case. Ironically, part of the manifestations is what we are seeing here now, because if we hadn't had the courage to go to court at that point in time, I think the situation would have even been worse now. So that was very timely that in 2000, following a decision by the Zamfara state government, which is my home state, to bring Sharia into the front burner of the political calculations of the country. Three of us who are indigenous of Zamfara state but are not Muslims went to court, and the chambers he worked with kindly offered their service. And consequently, down the line, there was a ruling 2 years ago at the Federal High Court of Appeal that it is now a law in Nigeria that a non-Muslim cannot be taken to a Sharia court. So thanks for having the courage to. Okay, in his presentation called Nigerian Youth, Nigerian Failure, and Nigerian Hope, he's identified, first of all, the fact that we live in a distressing time, and depending on what side of the equation you belong to, it's either the best of times or the worst of times. But what we really need as a means of focus, especially for our youth, is to be pragmatic optimists. And it's very obvious that the youths are an important part of the nation. And historically, we've seen that in every country in the world, there is a large dependency on the youth because they are the engine of the economic workforce of the country. Over the years, they're increasingly the ones who have the capabilities for choices, buying things, consumption, and so on and so forth. And sociopolitically also, they are the ones who reinvigorate the system because of the continuity that they provide, and therefore it is very necessary to invest in them. And what we are seeing in this day and age, of course, is the fact that they manifest a lot of versatility in their involvement in the new media, especially on the social media platforms, which has given them an empowerment that has never been experienced before in the history of mankind. Therefore, it is very important that we invest in the youths, in empowering them, because as we have seen with the Arab Spring, there's a lot of roles they can play in bringing change in the society. In Nigeria, therefore, we cannot ignore the youths. We cannot debate about development without discussing the youths. And it is very necessary to be able to position the youths in a way that they can rise to the challenge or challenges that confront us as a nation. And one of the ways to ensure that is to have a youth policy, a vibrant youth policy, which can drive this transformation. Dr. Amadi then goes on to look at the youth policy he has in mind, and one of the aspects that he touches on is the issue of survival. Given the security challenges we have currently in the country, it's very obvious, therefore, that, and as has been mentioned also by one of the youth leaders, there's a high casualty rate amongst the youths. So there's a need for a secure territory and the assurance of the rights of youths, which should not be taken for granted. Attendant to this is the need to ensure full rights of citizenship, now more than ever before, so that people can have a sense of belonging. And tied to that, of course, is that in every modern state, this right of citizenship is a very important aspect of existence. Then there's a need for freedom from fear and want. In his thinking, he thinks that one of the ways we can achieve this is through the MDGs, and things have to be done properly to ensure that the MDGs drive this change, and he's looked at the situation in South Africa as an example of how we can get it right in Nigeria. Now, there's a need to tackle unemployment, especially for the youth, with care and courage, and not just ambivalent statements, but we need to do it in a way that has a focus. And in his thinking, he thinks that the federal government and the states need to be fully involved in job creation. And the private sector also needs to be encouraged and given incentives so that they can contribute their own quota in tapping into the creativity and energies of the Nigerian youth. And to this end, he feels we should have a ministry that is dedicated to the youth, and not just the usual template of a ministry, but a ministry that actually has a focus on developing the skills that are relevant to the current needs, especially in the various, especially in the private sector. Now, Dr. Amadi then goes on to look at education, the significance of education. And one of the points he has raised is the fact that we are trapped in what he calls the extractive stage. And there's a need, if we are going to develop, to move or transit into the innovative stage. This is a very necessary transition. And part of the problem that we have with this is, of course, that we have a collapse, first of all, in the value system of education. And we need to move to a situation where the ethical landscape also has to be reconstructed so that hard work and learning can take their rightful position. But not only that, but we can produce youths that can face the global challenges which are confronting us, because the competition now is not just on our home turf, but there's a global level of competition that we need to address. We cannot ignore the fact that the world, in that sense, is becoming flat, and therefore something is going to challenge you at every time from outside, not just from inside, and therefore you have to have the capabilities of facing those challenges. Therefore, our educational curriculum also has to reflect this challenge. It has to have an orientation or a philosophy of promoting excellence. Therefore, the ethics of excellence should become paramount. And in his thinking, therefore, there should be more funding in the educational sector. There should be accountability across the board. There should be emphasis on merit. And of course, the curriculum should be world standard curriculum. Then he now looked at the issue of cities, how cities play an important role, especially in this current dispensation, with the global competitiveness of cities. And the challenge, therefore, is how do our cities, how are we developing our cities to impact on the lives of youths in the way that cities are developing across the world, with special areas of focus for these cities. And he gave a couple of examples how cities have demarcated themselves. Of course, once you think of Carnival, you think of Rio. Immediately, what comes to your mind is Rio when you hear of Carnival, because the Brazilians have modeled or have developed Rio into a city of carnivals. Then the other thing he's looked at also is the need for our youths to have a grounding in the history of their country. And this is significant because you cannot solve a problem if you do not know what the cause of the problem is. And he gave us several examples, quoting from Achebe, and he went on to say that the failure of memory and understanding is part of the Nigerian problem. And therefore, our youths must have familiarity with the issues confronting them, especially in the area of politics. But you cannot solve this if you have a poor reading culture. Not just reading the junk papers, but we need to read the things that are relevant to your society. And without that kind of grounding, without that kind of intellectual grounding, you cannot develop new insights, solve the problems that confront you. So therefore, it is time to unleash the potentials of the Nigerian youths for the Nigerian project. But that is only possible with memory and understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.